Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Edgevana Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Thiele, and joining me today is Alex Kehaya of the Solana Foundation, also the CEO and founder for Holaplex, a longtime entrepreneur and investor in the space of Web3 and blockchain. Really excited to have him on, especially considering the activities that we're seeing even at Edgevana, and excited to talk a little bit more about Web3 and what Alex is seeing from a Web3 perspective from the inside. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Really looking forward to the discussion, Alex. Why don't you take a minute, tell the listener a little bit about yourself, what you're working on these days.
Yeah, I like you said, I'm an entrepreneur and investor. I've been in this space since 2016. I started out working in crypto because my partner, Brian Fox, started a company called Orchid, where he was the original technical co-founder. Orchid is a decentralized VPN company that we built. I was the fourth hire there, ran business development there for about 3.5 years. And during that time, I became very interested in hardware and the physical infrastructure that is behind all these blockchain networks that this space is, that's like really powering this space. Specifically, I became interested in censorship resistance and decentralization. Yep. And I, like at the time, I was like, man, what if I could get an Orchid node, a VPN node in every single data center and ASN on the planet? That would be the most powerful, most censorship resistant VPN in the world, and or at least network in the world that could power a VPN. And while I was at Orchid, I started this advisory firm called Kano with Brian and this guy named Gustav and my other partner, Matthew. And back about 1.5 years ago, ended up leaving Orchid and working with the Solana Foundation full time, helping solve that same problem, this itch that I had to scratch that started with my work at Orchid. Working, so when I joined the foundation, it was a similar question that I was having and that I was talking to with like Anatoly and Raj and some of the other team members there. It's like, how can you help make sure that there's hardware available for the ecosystem across every data center on the planet? And what we ended up doing is building this thing called the server program, which you're familiar with because you're a part of that, one of the providers in the network that makes available on behalf of the community these servers that they can then lease directly from the providers on a month-to-month basis at affordable prices to run the infrastructure of the network. So basically, they validate transactions and also provide RPC services. Basically, make data available to applications. Really interesting, tough problem to solve. Required a lot of these partners like you guys to change your business models in interesting ways, right? Like normally you're used to selling, 10,000 servers to Facebook, whereas now you're selling 2 servers to one guy in, wherever, some random country, some random place around the world. And so I think what we've done is pretty innovative. I'm really excited about it. And it's helping further decentralize and further the decentralization, censorship resistance of the network. And I think it's a model that a lot of people could build off of.
I appreciate that. And just from kind of as an aside, we've enjoyed the progress, not only working with you and the Solana Foundation, but the progress of just getting to know the Web3 space a little bit more and understand more closely what success looks like for the average builder. And even, frankly, I'm hoping to learn more today from you and the audience as well. A little bit more about when we talk about Web3, what exactly are we talking about? What are the kind of the key things, right? And people have written about it. I've even written about it a little bit, but I still think that there's a lot of like defining edge. There's a lot of misnomers out there about what Web3 is, and is it different than what we've been doing? And then build on that with, what are some of the values of Web3? What are the things that we can do more of or do more effectively because we have Web3 as an option? So I'm really looking to dive into that, and I'm going to do just that. I'm going to just jump right in. again, want to reiterate, thank you for joining the podcast. So let's kind of do that as kind of a foundational question. What is to the casual observer, the layman, the technology person who knows Web 2 reasonably well, what is it about Web 3 that makes it unique and differentiated from anything we've been doing in the past?
Yeah, I mean, in ways it's really different, and in other ways it's the same. And I say that because if you talk to, I've been fortunate enough to meet some people, including my partner Brian, who helped. Like, they were very early in the internet, right? Even when they were building things, like the internet was not even fully in existence. And a lot of the ethos of Web 1.0, like the original builders of the World Wide Web and the internet, was the same as what we have today, as far as what's in Web 3. And it's just that the evolution and the way that was monetized drove incentives in a direction that corrupted those values, I think, and created these very extractive business models that I think that's the biggest thing that is. I really view Web3 as actually going back to the roots of the internet and the way that we wanted to think that this thing that we call the internet to be built. Right. And so it's really a new and sometimes very similar or even the same products being rebuilt with values embedded in them. So right. Things like I really value being able to self-custody my assets, my data, right? My following, my audience. This is like an example that I bring up a lot because it's something that we're doing at one of my companies, Holaplex, which is a open source, a suite of open source tools for people who want to build applications that involve NFTs on Solana, and it's all built on top of Metaplex, which is the protocol layer. But I won't get too deep into that. Right. But the social graph, one thing that we built over at Holaplex is this thing called a social graph that allows a creator, an artist, or anybody who wants to create a following on social media to have that following be associated with their identity, and be able to carry that wherever they take their identity. They can just plug in that same audience and all the people that they follow, or that follow them. And so it's true. This is an example of a different of the result of building with that ethos and that value of self-custody in place. I think another value is openness, open source, open in source code, and open in community. Being permissionless, meaning it's like you don't need to ask permission to join or to use these applications. Anybody can join, and they're open source, which is free as in speech, not as in beer necessarily. But that you can actually take this software, compose it with other software, and further innovation. And I think and again, like I said, in a way, these are not new ideas, but they're just being implemented on top of a technology stack that enables a sort of a paradigm shift in the economics and the values that actually result from the economics, from the models in place. And so if you look at various layer one networks like Solana, you have individual validators who are the ones providing the service to the network of writing transactions to the blockchain. Right? There's individual validators providing that service. Whereas, Facebook is a centralized company that is recording all of your likes, right? And the things that you like, and they're using that data plus the audience you bring to monetize themselves, versus passing on that monetization back to the users or back to the actual individuals who create the value in the network. Right. So you've got open source, you've got permissionless, you've got self-custody of data and assets. You also have censorship resistance, meaning, no one can take it down. I think the way that I look at censorship resistance is there are some companies that offer products. Holaplex has a suite of tools that we host for you. Since we're the ones hosting that, we can take it down if we don't want to host that content or whatever it is, but it is open source and the data is on chain. And so our storefronts that indie creators use to sell their NFTs are hosted by us, but the brand, your logo, your fonts, your background color, and all of your creations and that relationship you have with your followers, all stored on chain. So if you copy our code base, fork the code base and self-host it and plug your wallet address in, which is your identity, it sucks all that data into your site and you have it again. And then, you can interact with it and your customers or your audience can interact with it. And that's like a very fundamental shift in how you build products. If you look at Shopify, Facebook, even WordPress is open source, but like, how do you get your data, right? It's stored on some server somewhere by some hosting company. And if I leave the hosting company, I lose my data. Shopify, if I wanted to move to some other e-commerce platform, well, I have to rebuild my entire audience from scratch again. Right. Same thing with Instagram and Facebook and all those people. Like, you don't own what you've created. Think about these influencers that have created massive followings on all these social media platforms. Well, they don't own that. The company owns that.
Yeah, I mean, they could, in theory, for instance, talking about WordPress, which is a stupid example considering the complexity of trying to do this with all of Facebook or all of Instagram or something. But in theory, you could copy paste all of your individual blog postings and download that, and that could be your data. But it wouldn't have any of the meta associated with it that actually drives the value, which is what you're really talking about. The value of a single image by itself or a single blog by itself is measured by the connections it's made. And that's the meta. And if you can't bring that with you, I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my answer. Like, what is Web3? It's a value, it's products built with these values in place, and really enforced. The values are often enforced through things like token economics, and like being recorded on a blockchain, having transactions and interactions being recorded on a blockchain. Right. So it does come with some consequences though. Like if you want to use your identity to store your following, and you lose access to your private keys, or you give them to someone else, you've just lost your audience. And so you have to know what that means for you from a security standpoint. So there are some trade-offs, for sure. So.
I could see that. I mean, most everybody's heard at least one of the stories, like the guy that's digging through a dump somewhere in England looking for his lost hard drive with all the encryption for his Bitcoin. So that's a real risk that we take ownership for. So thinking about we sort of bridged to topics that I was going to ask, and that's great because they blend together effectively. And that's what is Web3 and what are some of the values associated with it. Talking a little bit more about why Web3 should matter to folks. I've been looking. In fact, I even came up with a lame brain idea for blockchain before I really knew how to spell blockchain. Trying to force fit it into things, but in real terms, I think that some function of what I was playing with at the time could still occur. It would just probably occur very differently than what I was thinking about, and that's really authentication of product in person as it's exchanged, right? Which is a big part of NFTs now, et cetera. So when I think of Web3, when I think of blockchain, I think of the metaverse and all of those. Being part of the same. One of the first things that comes to mind is the potential to do away with the secondary, tertiary, and every other sherry you can think of that has to do with trying to protect your identity online and trying to validate who you are online. Do you see that as a real opportunity with Web3 and blockchain in general, that we potentially have better ownership over our identity going forward?
Yes and no. There are some hard problems that still need to be solved. And I think like this is where we need like some standards, like industry-wide standards around identity in place, because we do live in a multi-chain world where there are multiple blockchains and your identity needs to carry across those chains. And like I use the example of like the credit cards and payments, right? Like if I have, if my credit card gets hacked and I need to change my credit card, like I have to now get a new credit card and then like reactivate that my new credit card across like 100 different subscriptions or something like that. You can kind of think about that in the same context of like identity across multiple chains. Not that it would necessarily get hacked, but it's like a lot to manage.
Right.
And so that's a problem that I don't think has been solved really yet. That makes the thing you're asking hard. And it kind of is like where you can see, because a lot of people have multiple wallets. Some people have like dozens of wallets that they use to manage stuff on, and like sometimes they, for privacy reasons, want some of that stuff not completely linked to their identity. And so there's this little bit of an issue there, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and hadn't really thought about it that way. So, if you're the average user, or even an investor or builder in this space, what are some of the things that should matter to you about Web3?
Well, I think that artists are starting to see this, and they're like the ones that I think are really early adopters from the creator space,
right.
that have started to really benefit from removing the middlemen from their way of living, way of making money, being able to sell directly to collectors who collect their work, and receive that money directly without a middleman in place, and to be able to do that in a digital way globally to a global audience, to recreate the kind of community that they've built locally, but on a global scale.
Right.
I think that has really impacted them, and they are definitely, from what I'm seeing, like I'm talking to artists all the time that are like, didn't even have a Twitter account before they started interacting with NFTs. And they're coming online and starting to use this technology. So I think they are like the sort of like next wave of early adopters. I think that the general public is starting to become more and more aware of the extractive nature of some of these products that they're using. And I think like as they become more aware of that being a problem, then they will start looking at Web3 and starting to care about, things like custodying their data more and more.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I saw, I can't remember the name now, which is probably better that I don't talk about a lot of company names anyway. But I saw a company that was focused on helping musicians, singers, artists from the industry of creating music have exactly what you're talking about, that direct access to the consumer and their audience, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought that was really powerful. And just so happened, I have a niece who's in a band that's been signed a while back by Capitol Records, and so I shared it with her. I'm not sure if she's done anything with it yet, but I did think that was an interesting opportunity, as you said, to get rid of the middleman and take more control over your product and where it goes and how it gets consumed. I think that's outstanding. So one of the things, it's funny, as Edgevana's made a pivot in relation to a lot of the work that we're doing directly with you as an example, and now potentially with others, I've been asked a lot of questions. It's like, well, how does this work? You were, focused on solving problems for Web2 companies, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a little internal laugh occurs as I think about the fact that here we go again. When serverless came out, people kept saying, "Oh, we don't need servers anymore." Well, you still need servers. You're just not identifying a specific server for the function that you're running as a function, as a service. Web3 still needs infrastructure. And you hinted about that a little bit before. Can you talk a little bit more about how that infrastructure, what that infrastructure might look like, how it might grow? What are some of the, and this is a kind of a big question, Alex, and I apologize, but there's infrastructure that's built, as you described, specifically to support the function and success of a chain. But then there's infrastructure that would be built to help manage data, or applications that might use chain for approvals or use chain for some other functionality. And then there's who pays for it, right? Nothing is truly free. And you mentioned tokenization. So again, I know that's a huge question. Take any.
Yeah, I can speak to it. So there's a bunch of things here, and I think like Some of these need to be decentralized, and other ones maybe not so much. And then other ones like are okay to not be decentralized now, but they probably will be in the future. And I'm going to speak in the context of Solana, but I think a lot of these things apply to most blockchains and most ecosystems. So on Solana, we have validators, which are people who run hardware that are writing transactions to the blockchain. They do this through this process called consensus, which I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds on. They're like the heartbeat of the network. Then if they're the heartbeat of the network, then RPC is like the body of the network, right? So if you need 10,000 validators, then you're going to need like orders of magnitude more RPC providers out there. And RPC is how applications get data to look at and read from the blockchain. And that can be more centralized. You can have like 100 RPC servers sitting in a data center in Tokyo, operated by a company that's like selling services to an application developer who needs to use the information that it's reading on the blockchain in their app for performance reasons. So like, let's say I buy an NFT, like I hit the buy button. Well, the transaction goes to the validators, and the validators like write the transaction. That's how it gets processed. But how does the application know that NFT was bought and show in the user interface that it was bought and that it was sold? That's RPC sending data back to the application saying, yes, this transaction succeeded. Change the UI to show that it succeeded. Yeah. And then another layer on top of RPC is called indexing, right? And so on Solana, there's this thing called the Geyser plugin, which is like a plugin that sits inside of the validator that can index data and display it to users really fast, like even faster than directly calling an RPC from an RPC server. Okay. Anyway, you need like hundreds of thousands of these servers. So probably, I mean, I'm overselling here, but you need a lot, orders of magnitude more than the validators to get high performing applications. And, Ethereum has Infura. That's like a centralized service that essentially does the same thing. It provides data to application developers for this purpose, for a very similar purpose. And, if you're going to get like Web2 performant scaled applications to billions of people, you need data, right? And this is the same issue that like Facebook and Instagram and everybody else on the planet runs into with needing data. And there are decentralized solutions that are out there, like for indexing the graph is a decentralized solution that supports many chains and is a good solution, and lots of developers use it. There's also centralized providers who sell a service where you can get like an API endpoint to access this data. And it's something that Holaplex has gotten really good at because we've had to for some of the products that we've built. Then there are like other services that are either separate blockchains or just like separate services that are utilizing that utilize hardware, right? Like storage, right? Decentralized storage networks like Filecoin or Arweave. And this is how like Holaplex is able to, the storefronts that we have, like why you can fork the code and just like plugging your wallet address to a self-hosted storefront and pulling all that data is because the entire front end is stored on Arweave instead of a centralized server. Right. So like Shopify stores your fonts and your background images and all that brand and stuff on some centralized server that doesn't belong to you. It belongs to them. Right. They don't really give you a way to export that data. And so, those are things that require infrastructure. Yeah. So there's like a lot of other like reasons, other services and things like that are provided by individual people and networks, like networks that are powered by individuals versus networks that are powered by giant companies, right? And because they're powered by individuals, they're more censorship resistant, right? Like you'd have to literally like wipe out all the servers run by all these individual people versus just like targeting one company and trying to block them from exceeding. Yeah. Does that answer your? I feel like I lost part of the question.
It does. I mean, and it's, don't get me wrong. I think we could take that one question and turn it into an hour-long podcast for a lot of different reasons. But I think it brings some visibility to one of the core questions that a lot of people ask about blockchain is that, well, I thought blockchain was just everywhere. Well, it is in theory everywhere, but it still needs to run on things. It still needs data centers. It still needs network. And one of the, and maybe we can wrap up on this, Alex, because as you might guess, based on the business that I'm in, I speak with a lot of data center owner operators, right? People that actually own the physical buildings that are data centers. And many of them have, up until very recently, been very hesitant to do any business with anybody that says blockchain in their name or crypto in their name. And the reason they're hesitant isn't because they visualize or don't visualize a future for the market of Web3 and blockchain applications and NFTs and stuff like that, but because most of them have been turned on to the idea of blockchain as a data center consuming solution through people that are just mining.
Yeah.
And that's a very different story.
And look, that was definitely like early days, a big part of it. But I think today, the kinds of services that can be offered by someone who has the skills to run, say, a validator on Solana are expanding very rapidly. And they're decentralized. They're servers like automating tasks like cron jobs, right? Like that like. We just had to start Chronos that's launching on Solana. That's really cool. That allows you, it's a plugin that sits on top of a validator that like allows you to run cron jobs, right? Neat. And schedule tasks. And they're providing services to applications that are very similar to like all the stuff that people are running on from centralized companies, but just individuals are running the services and getting compensated for that. Yep. This is only going to continue to grow as this industry grows. And so back in 2017, when I first started trying to talk to data centers, I ran into the same problem. Like I was able to get in touch with a few and talk to them, but like they'd be like, yeah, interesting, but crypto, not really going to touch it right now. But the story has changed. Like if you're not doing something, you're in crypto, you're kind of starting in the blockchain space. You're missing the boat. It's still super early though. You haven't missed the boat yet. It would be.
I tend to agree. I mean, I tend to agree with. I think Eric Poulier. I did a podcast with him recently. We talked about the metaverse specifically at length, and again, even with my relatively minor experience and knowledge of the potential opportunity of the metaverse, I see it as being able to make the assumption that the metaverse will effectively be what the internet was to a company in 2000, 5 years from now. And if you don't have that metaverse spot, like if you didn't have a web position in the year 2000, and you were if you were anything bigger than a small flower company or sandwich shop in 2000, and you didn't have a website, you didn't exist. And I think that that's likely to be true with the metaverse as well. So really cool stuff. And I really appreciate the explanation and the education you provided today, Alex, and I think the audience will too. Is there anything in particular you'd like to close out with, like maybe if somebody is interested in learning more about this industry or getting involved, any thoughts on where they should go?
Yeah, my DMs are open on Twitter. I'm crazy slammed, but I'll try to respond. And then I think going to conferences, like major conferences, and just start networking, talking to people, play around in the space, go buy some NFTs, do your own research though, not investment advice, but like definitely just like go and play a little bit and start using it and start realizing from using it what the impact it could be. If you're interested in the server program, go check out the Solana.Foundation website, check that out. It's pretty self-service, reach out to Mark, and I'm sure he'll help you figure it out as well. Thanks for having me on the show.
I appreciate that. But so, Alex, I've benefited from your experience a few times, and certainly learned a lot from you as we've worked with you over the past few months. If people want to follow you, you mentioned Twitter. I know you have Twitter. I know you have a blog presence, or not a blog presence, a podcast presence. Any place else that people should follow you, and how exactly do they find you on Twitter and on podcast?
Yeah, I have a podcast called The Index, which you can check out. It covers a lot of the same topics. It's sponsored by The Graph. I know the people over there pretty well. And then You can find me on Twitter at AFKEHAYA. I should probably work on my handle to make it easier to say, but it's just AFKEHAYA. It's Alex, and then my middle initial and my last name. I don't use LinkedIn. Don't message me there. I won't see it. But if you want to tweet at me or something, I'll probably see that. Anybody looking to understand the cryptocurrency space, Twitter is definitely where people live and communicate. Sure. It's a bit of a wild world, but so enter at your own risk. Absolutely.
Well, Alex, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you again for joining. And everyone, thank you for listening. Again, this is Mark Thiele, your host. And just if you have anybody else that you think would be interesting to have on the show, please feel free to email me at podcast@edgevana.com. And until next time, thank you very much.